Did you know we touch our phones about 2,617 times a day? We send billions of texts. We scroll through miles of social media feeds. We are more connected than any humans in history. So why do so many of us feel so disconnected? Why does common courtesy feel so uncommon? We have more ways to communicate, but it feels like we have less to say, and the way we say it has changed. So respect seems to be a currency in free fall. We type things to strangers we would never say to their face. We ignore the person in front of us for the screen in our hand. We've optimized for speed and efficiency, but we may have lost something important along the way. Something human. What if the solution isn't in a new app or a new technology? What if it's buried in the past? The Middle Ages get a bad rap. We think of mud and plagues and endless war. And there was plenty of that. But it was also an age of intricate social codes. It was a time when respect wasn't just a feeling. It was an action. It was a language spoken through gestures, words, and rituals. And these weren't just about bowing to kings. They were about holding society together. They were about acknowledging the humanity in the person standing in front of you, whether they were a lord or a peasant. Could some of these old ways offer a blueprint for fixing our modern rudeness? Could a forgotten gesture or a simple phrase help us see each other again? Let's look at some of these lost arts of respect and ask if we should bring them back. Number 16, could a simple bow fix our frayed connections? We live in a world of rigid postures. We stand our ground. We don't back down. Our body language often screams confrontation even when we don't mean it to.
Imagine you're in a tense meeting at work. Someone disagrees with your idea.
The instinct is to lean forward, to raise your voice, to physically assert your position. Now, imagine a different response. Instead of puffing up your chest, you give a slight, deliberate nod. A small bow of the head. You lower your eyes for just a second. It's not a sign of surrender. It's a sign of listening. It says, I hear you. I acknowledge your point of view, even if I don't agree with it. The entire dynamic of the room could shift in that single, silent moment. In the medieval world, the bow was a complex and vital part of communication. It was a physical vocabulary of respect. A quick nod to a merchant, a deeper inclination for a guildmaster, a full bow for a noble. These weren't empty gestures. They were a constant physical reinforcement of the social order. They reminded everyone of their place, yes, but they also reminded everyone that they had a place. The historian Johann Huizinga, in his seminal work, The Waning of the Middle Ages, described late medieval life as having a kind of theatricality. The life was performed, and these gestures were part of the script that kept society from descending into chaos. For the nobility in the Burgundian court of the 15th century, for example, the rules of etiquette, including when and how to bow, were incredibly detailed. They were a way of managing power and ambition without constant bloodshed. By physically demonstrating respect, you were de-escalating potential conflict before it even started. Modern science is starting to catch up to this ancient wisdom. There's a field called embodied cognition, which is the idea that our bodies influence our minds. We don't just smile because we're happy. We can also feel happier because we force ourselves to smile. A 2010 study by social psychologists Amy Cuddy, Dana Carney, and Andy Yap showed that holding power poses, expansive, open postures could actually increase testosterone and decrease the stress hormone cortisol. The reverse is also true. A posture of deference can have a psychological effect. When you bow, you are momentarily making yourself vulnerable. You are lowering your head and exposing the back of your neck, a primal signal of trust. This act can trigger a corresponding de-escalation in the other person. Your vulnerability can invite their empathy. It short-circuits the fight-or-flight response. We don't need to bring back elaborate courtly bows, but we can bring back the principle. Imagine a world where we acknowledge each other more. A slight bow of the head to the bus driver. A nod to the person who holds the door for you. A deliberate moment of quiet acknowledgement in a conversation. It's a way of saying, I see you. In a world where so many feel invisible, that is a powerful message. The Japanese culture offers a living example of this. In Japan, bowing ojigi is not an ancient relic. It's a part of everyday life. There are different bows for apologies, for gratitude, for greetings. It is a nuanced and essential tool for social harmony. It's not about subservience, it's about mutual respect. It oils the gears of society. we could use some of that oil. Our modern interactions are often full of friction, of sharp edges, and unspoken aggression. A simple, conscious gesture of physical respect could be the thing that smooths them out. What happens to our brains when our primary mode of interaction removes all body language? If a physical act of deference can neurologically reduce aggression in both parties, what are we losing in our text-based arguments? Could the epidemic of online rage be partly a result of our disembodied communication? And what non-verbal signals of respect have we lost forever, and what undiscovered digital equivalents are waiting to be found? Number 15, does calling someone sir actually change how we treat them? Language is more than just a tool for transmitting information, it shapes our reality. The words we choose can build walls or they can build bridges. Today, we've moved towards a radical informality. Everyone is dude or bro. Your boss is Dav. Your doctor is Susan. On the surface, this feels friendly and egalitarian. It breaks down stuffy old hierarchies, but has it also eroded a fundamental layer of respect? Does calling everyone by their first name all the time make us subconsciously see them as less authoritative, less worthy of our focused attention? Think about the old distinction in English between thou and you. Until the 17th century, thou was the informal, intimate form you used for friends, family, and children. You was the formal, respectful form you used for strangers, social superiors, or as a sign of respect to an equal. William Shakespeare's plays are full of this nuance. When a character switches from you to thou, it signals a shift in the relationship, a moment of anger, intimacy, or contempt. This distinction, which exists in many other languages like French, "Turzit was," or German, "Du was sie," forces the speaker to make a conscious choice about the level of respect they are conveying. When English lost thou and you became the universal pronoun, we lost a specific tool for verbally calibrating respect. The use of titles like Sir, Madame, Monsieur, or serves a similar function. It creates a small professional distance. It's not about being cold or unfriendly. It's about acknowledging the role a person occupies. Calling a teacher Mr. Smith rather than John reinforces the structure of the classroom. It reminds the student that this person is not their buddy. They are a figure of authority and knowledge. A 2018 study published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology found that using formal forms of address can increase cognitive distance, making people think more abstractly and rationally. When we are less familiar, we are sometimes more objective. This could be incredibly useful. Imagine a heated political debate where opponents were required to address each other as the honorable gentleman or my learned friend. It might not solve their disagreements, but the very formality of the language could cool tempers and encourage more reasoned arguments. This isn't about bringing back a rigid class system. It's about being more intentional with our language. We could reintroduce a culture of situational formality. Maybe the default for a first interaction with a professional isn't their first name. Maybe we ask, how would you prefer I call you, instead of just assuming familiarity. This simple act gives the other person agency and shows a baseline of respect. It's also about how we talk to people in service roles. Saying, "Excuse me, sir," to get a waiter's attention is fundamentally more respectful than a sharp "hey." It acknowledges their personhood beyond their immediate function. The philosopher and social critic Byung-Chul Han has written about the disappearance of ritual in modern society. He argues that our obsession with authenticity and informality has stripped away the symbolic forms that give life structure and meaning. Formal address is one of those small rituals. It costs us nothing, but it signals a powerful message. I recognize your position, I respect your role, and I am approaching this interaction with seriousness. If language actively shapes our perception of reality, as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggests, did the universal adoption of you subtly flatten our social perceptions and make it harder to conceptualize hierarchy and formal respect? What happens in our brains when we switch from a formal to an informal address? Is there a measurable shift in activity in the regions associated with empathy versus those associated with critical analysis? And in a future dominated by AI assistants with human names and conversational styles, will we lose the ability to differentiate between a tool and a person, further eroding our use of respectful language with actual humans? Number 14, what if your guest was more important than your king? Imagine a stranger, a traveler, caught in a storm, knocking on your door. Today, our first reaction is suspicion. We might look through the peephole, ignore the knock, or even call the police. Our home is a fortress, and the world outside is a threat. Now, imagine a different world. Imagine a world where that stranger at your door was a sacred duty, where providing them with food, drink, and shelter wasn't just a kindness, but a profound social and moral obligation. This was the world of medieval hospitality. The concept of guest right was a cornerstone of many ancient and medieval societies. It was the sacred and unbreakable rule that a host must protect their guests at all costs, and a guest must not harm their host. In a world with few inns and dangerous roads, this was a practical necessity for travel and trade. But it was more than just practical, it was a deeply ingrained code of honor. Stories abound in sagas and chronicles of lords who would rather go to war than fail in their duty to a guest. The Old English epic Beowulf is, in many ways, a story about the duties of hosts and guests. King Hrothgar offers lavish hospitality to Beowulf, and in return, Beowulf repays this kindness by defending the hall from the monster Grendel. It was a reciprocal bond of trust and respect established the moment a guest crossed the threshold. This principle is not unique to Europe. The Arabic concept of diafa and the Pashtun code of Momastia are similar, powerful traditions of hospitality that place the guest's safety and comfort above all else. What have we replaced this with? We have commercialized hospitality. We pay for a room at a Holiday Inn. We buy a meal at a restaurant. The transaction is clean, efficient, and utterly devoid of any real human connection or moral obligation. We've outsourced the sacred duty of hospitality to the service industry, and in our own homes, we entertain. We invite people we already know, and we rarely, if ever, open our doors to a true stranger. Sociologist Robert Putnam, in his book Bowling Alone, famously documented the collapse of American community life over the last few decades. We are less likely to join clubs, to know our neighbors, or to participate in community activities. We have retreated into our private bubbles. The decline of genuine hospitality is a symptom of this larger social fragmentation. Bringing back medieval hospitality doesn't mean we have to let dangerous people into our homes, but it could mean rediscovering the spirit of the practice. It could mean seeing our neighbors not as strangers, but as potential guests. It could mean creating spaces in our communities that are genuinely welcoming. Think of the community fridge movement, where people leave food for anyone who needs it, a modern, anonymous form of offering sustenance. Think of creating welcome committees in apartment buildings to greet new residents. It's about shifting our mindset from suspicion to welcome. It's about understanding that a strong community is built on the belief that we have a duty to care for one another, even those we don't know. The psychologist Abraham Maslow placed love and belonging as a fundamental human need right after physiological safety. By closing our doors, we are not just protecting ourselves from potential threats. We are also starving ourselves of a basic psychological nutrient. The simple act of offering a cup of tea to a delivery person or inviting a new neighbor over for dinner can be a radical act of community building in an age of isolation. If the brain's trust circuit, involving oxytocin, is activated by acts of generosity and reciprocity, what is the long-term neurological cost of living in a society that minimizes these interactions with strangers? Is the modern rise in anxiety disorders linked in any way to the collapse of the social safety net that traditions like guest right once provided? And in a future where more people live alone than ever before, could a revival of communal living spaces based on principles of radical hospitality be a viable solution to the epidemic of loneliness? Number 13, should your word be a magical, unbreakable bond? We live in a world of fine print. We sign 100-page terms of service agreements we never read. We have contracts for our jobs, our apartments, our phone plans. Every promise is provisional, every agreement subject to clauses and subclauses. We rely on a complex legal system to enforce our commitments because on its own, a person's word means very little. If someone breaks a promise, our reaction is disappointment, but rarely shock. We've come to expect it. This would have been unthinkable to the medieval mind. In a society where a majority of people were illiterate, a person's spoken word and the oath they swore were the bedrock of the entire social and legal system. An oath was not just a promise. It was a sacred, almost magical act. When a vassal knelt before his lord and swore an oath of fealty, he was binding his very soul. He would place his hands between his lords and swear by God and these holy relics. Breaking that oath was not just a breach of contract, it was a mortal sin, an act of perjury that damned you in the next life and made you a social outcast in this one. The historian Mark Bloch, in his classic Feudal Society, emphasizes that the entire feudal structure rested on these personal, sworn bonds. The relationship between lord and vassal was not an impersonal contract of employment. It was a deeply personal, sacred commitment. The power of this word is bond. Culture was immense. It allowed for the functioning of commerce, the administration of justice, and the raising of armies, all without a massive bureaucratic state. A merchant's word given at a trade fair in Champagne had to be good, or he would be ruined. A knight's promise of safe conduct had to be honored, or his reputation, the most valuable thing he owned, would be destroyed. The story of King John I of France is a famous example. Captured by the English at the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, he was allowed to return to France to raise his ransom, leaving his son as a hostage. When his son escaped, John, believing his honor was at stake, voluntarily returned to captivity in England, where he eventually died. And to the modern mind, this is madness. To the medieval mind, it was the only honorable choice. His word was worth more than his freedom, or even his life. We have lost this reverence for the spoken word. We say, I'll call you right back, and don't. We say, let's get coffee sometime with no intention of doing so. These are small social lies, white lies, but they have a corrosive effect. They teach us that words are cheap and promises are disposable. This devalues language itself. What if we try to bring back a measure of this medieval seriousness? What if we made fewer promises, but kept every single one we made? What if, before giving our word, we paused and considered the weight of it, as if we were swearing on something sacred? Research in psychology has shown that consistency is a key component of trust. When a person's words and actions align consistently over time, we feel safe with them. We trust them. By being careless with our own word, we are eroding our own trustworthiness. This isn't about swearing oaths on holy relics. It's about cultivating a personal culture of integrity. It means not overcommitting. It means being honest when you can't do something. It means that when you say eyes, it is a bond. This would change everything. Business meetings would be more efficient. Friendships would be deeper. Our own self-respect would increase because we would know ourselves to be people who do what they say they will do. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote that the sovereign individual is the one who has the right to make promises. He saw it as the ultimate expression of human freedom and power, the ability to bind your future self with your present word. By treating our promises so lightly, we are giving up that power. If our brains have a deep-seated need for cognitive consistency, a state where our beliefs and behaviors are in alignment, what is the mental stress created by a culture of casual, low-stakes promise-breaking? Does the constant small-scale hypocrisy of not doing what we say we will do contribute to a general sense of anxiety and inauthenticity? And what would a social media platform designed to reward integrity and long-term commitment look like, instead of one designed for fleeting, hot takes and ephemeral content? Number 12, why did we stop valuing mastery? Think about the last time you bought a piece of furniture. Chances are it came in a flat-pack box from a massive anonymous factory overseas. You followed some confusing instructions, put it together with an Allen key, and hoped for the best. It will probably last a few years before it starts to wobble and needs to be replaced. It is a product of a system that values speed, cost, and convenience above all else. Quality, durability, and craftsmanship are afterthoughts. Now, picture a medieval apprentice in a carpenter's workshop. He might spend 7 years or more living with his master, starting with the most menial tasks, sweeping the floor, sharpening tools, learning the names and properties of different woods. For years, he would just watch. He would learn the rhythm of the saw, the feel of a sharp chisel, the smell of oak versus pine. Only after years of patient observation and practice would he be allowed to work on a real piece. Eventually, he might become a journeyman, traveling to learn from other masters before finally creating his masterpiece to be judged by the guild. If it was good enough, he would be admitted as a master himself. This system was slow, rigid, and demanding. But it was built on a profound respect for mastery. It was a culture that believed that true skill took time, dedication, and a deep, almost spiritual relationship with one's craft. The guild system, which flourished in Europe from the 11th century onwards, was the institutional heart of this respect. The guild set standards for quality, regulated prices, and managed the training of new craftsmen. To be a member of the Stonemasons Guild, or the Weavers Guild, was to have a respected identity. The cathedrals that still stand today, Chartres, Notre Dame, Canterbury, are silent testaments to this culture. They were built over generations by thousands of anonymous craftsmen who had dedicated their entire lives to perfecting a single skill. They were not creatives or entrepreneurs in the modern sense. They were masters of their craft, and that was enough. In his book, The Craftsman, sociologist Richard Sennett argues that we have created a deep divide between head and hand. We value intellectual work over manual work. We see a software engineer as more successful than a master plumber, even if the plumber has more skill, runs a more successful business, and provides a more essential service. This is a modern prejudice. The medieval mind would have found it baffling. The ability to create a perfect dovetail joint or forge a strong, sharp sword was a form of genius. This respect for craft is a form of respect for human potential. It is the belief that a human being, through dedication and practice, can achieve a state of excellence. Bringing this back doesn't mean we all have to become apprentices, but it could mean changing what we value. It means choosing to buy one well-made, locally crafted chair that will last a lifetime instead of 5 cheap ones that will end up in a landfill. It means being willing to pay more for food grown by a farmer who has mastered the art of sustainable agriculture. It means teaching our children not just to code, but also to cook, to sew, to fix a bicycle. It means respecting the knowledge of the experienced mechanic, the electrician, the chef, as much as we respect the knowledge of the lawyer or the consultant. It's about fighting back against the culture of disposability and planned obsolescence. It's about rediscovering the deep satisfaction that comes from doing one thing and doing it well. The Japanese have a word for this, shokunin. It means an artisan who is dedicated to the pursuit of perfection in their craft, not for money or fame, but for its own sake. It is an attitude, a spiritual path. That is a form of respect we desperately need to relearn. What is the psychological effect of living in a world filled with poorly made, disposable objects? Does it foster a sense of transience and a lack of respect for our physical environment? If the brain finds deep satisfaction and releases dopamine during the process of mastering a complex physical skill, are we depriving ourselves of a fundamental source of human happiness by devaluing craft? And in an age of AI that can generate good enough art, music, and text in seconds, what will happen to the human motivation to endure the long, difficult journey to true mastery? Number 11. Could your seating chart change the world? At a modern dinner party, seating is often a casual affair. We tell people to sit wherever you like. We value informality and the idea that everyone is equal, but does this casualness sometimes lead to awkwardness? Does it prevent us from having the conversations we should be having? We end up sitting next to the people we already know, reinforcing our own social bubbles. In a medieval great hall, seating was anything but casual. It was a science and an art, a clear and public statement of the social order. The most important feature was the salt cellar, a large, often elaborate container for salt, which was a precious commodity. To be seated above the salt, closer to the Lord and his family at the high table, was a mark of high honor. To be seated below the salt was to be of a lower status. Everyone who entered the hall could see the hierarchy of the entire household at a glance. The seating arrangement was a map of power and respect. The Book of the Courtier, a 16th century guide to etiquette by Baldassare Castiglione, details the immense importance placed on such social rituals. Knowing where to sit and who to seat where was a crucial political skill. This might sound rigid and snobbish to us, but it served a vital purpose. It made the rules of interaction clear. It reduced ambiguity and potential conflict. You knew who you were supposed to talk to and how you were supposed to talk to them. But it wasn't just about reinforcing the existing order. A clever lord could use seating arrangements to send subtle messages. He could honor a loyal knight by seating him above a richer but less reliable baron. He could try to mend a feud by placing two rivals near each other, under his watchful eye. He could welcome a new ally by giving them a place of honor at his own table. The seating chart was a tool of social engineering. It was a way of actively managing relationships and demonstrating respect in a very visible way. We do a modern version of this at formal events like weddings, but we've lost the art of it in our daily lives. What if we brought back a more intentional approach to how we arrange ourselves? In a business meeting, for example, instead of everyone just grabbing a seat, a manager could consciously seat people from different departments next to each other to encourage new connections. In a classroom, a teacher could change the seating plan not as a punishment, but as a way to create new learning dynamics. At a family dinner, we could make a point of seating a grandparent next to a grandchild to encourage the sharing of stories across generations. This isn't about creating rigid hierarchies. It's about using physical space to foster better human connections. It's about being a social architect in our own small way. It's about thinking who needs to talk to whom, and then creating the physical conditions to make that happen. The science of proxemics, the study of how humans use space, was pioneered by anthropologist Edward T. Hall in the 1960s. He showed how physical distance between people affects their relationships. By consciously arranging people in space, we can influence their interactions. A 2012 study from researchers at Cornell University found that firefighters who ate meals together in the firehouse had better group job performance. The simple act of sharing a table built cohesion and trust. The medieval lord understood this intuitively. His great hall wasn't just a place to eat, it was the engine room of his power, and the seating chart was the operator's manual. We can use the same principle. By being more thoughtful about where we sit and where we ask others to sit, we can show respect not just to individuals, but to the potential relationships between them. If our brains are hardwired to interpret physical proximity as a signal of intimacy and social connection, what is the cumulative effect of social media algorithms that create filter bubbles, a digital seating arrangement that ensures we only ever sit with people who already agree with us? Could we design physical spaces, offices, schools, public squares with intentional seating to combat social polarization? And as remote work becomes more common, what are the digital salt cellars we can create to signify respect and build community in a virtual world? Number 10 is silence the most powerful way to show you're listening. Our world is noisy. We are bombarded with notifications, advertisements, and the constant chatter of 24-hour news and social media. In a conversation, we are often not truly listening. We are waiting for our turn to speak. We are formulating our reply while the other person is still talking. Silence makes us uncomfortable. We rush to fill it. We see it as a void, a sign that the conversation has failed. In many traditional and medieval cultures, silence was understood very differently. It was not a void, it was a space. It was a sign of respect, contemplation, and careful listening. In the presence of a king, a bishop, or an elder, silence was the expected and respectful default. You did not speak until you were spoken to. This wasn't just about fear or subservience. It was a recognition that the person of higher status had wisdom and experience that was worth listening to. Their words had weight, and to interrupt them or to speak frivolously was a profound sign of disrespect. The Rule of St. Benedict, written in the 6th century and a guiding document for monastic life for centuries, has a whole chapter on silence. Monks were encouraged to cultivate silence at all times. For them, silence was a path to humility and a way to be more receptive to the Word of God. But it also created a deeply respectful and orderly community. This respect for silence extended beyond monasteries and royal courts. In a negotiation between two parties, the person who spoke less and listened more often held the power. They were gathering information, observing their opponent, and choosing their words with care. The brash, talkative person was seen as foolish and easy to manipulate. The Japanese have a concept called haraje, which translates loosely to belly art. It is a form of implicit nonverbal communication where understanding is reached through silence, posture, and intuition rather than direct words. It is a deep cultural belief that the most important things are often left unsaid. We can bring this back into our lives by practicing the art of the pause. When someone is speaking to us, instead of immediately jumping in with our own story or opinion, we can take a breath after they finish. We can hold a moment of silence. This does two things. First, it shows the other person that we have truly heard them. We are not just reacting, we're processing what they said. It makes them feel seen and respected. Second, it gives us a moment to formulate a more thoughtful reply. It prevents us from saying the first reactive thing that comes to mind. Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, built his entire therapeutic method around active listening. A key component of this is to listen without judgment. and to allow for silence, giving the client space to explore their own thoughts. This can be a superpower in our personal and professional lives. In a negotiation, letting the other side fill the silence can often lead them to reveal more than they intended. In an argument with a loved one, a moment of shared silence can de-escalate the tension and allow for a more empathetic response. In a world that prizes the hot take and the witty comeback, choosing silence is a radical act of respect. It respects the speaker, it respects the topic of conversation, and it respects our own ability to think before we speak. It is the difference between hearing and listening. If our brains enter a more reflective and integrative state during moments of silence, as some neuroscience suggests, is our constantly noisy environment literally preventing us from thinking deeply. What is the relationship between the decline of comfortable silence in conversation and the rise of polarized reactive arguments? And could we introduce silence training into schools and workplaces as a way to improve communication, foster empathy, and reduce conflict? Number 9, what if your family name was your brand? Today, our identity is highly individualistic. We build our own personal brand on social media. We define ourselves by our careers, our hobbies, our personal achievements. Our family name is often just a label, a convenient way to distinguish us from other people named John or Mary. We feel that we are the sole authors of our own reputation. For a medieval person, this way of thinking would be completely alien. Identity was not individual, it was corporate. Your primary identity came from your family, your clan, or your guild. Your family name was not just a label, it was your reputation, your history, and your honor, all rolled into one. The actions of one member of a family reflected on everyone. An act of cowardice by a son could bring shame upon his father and brothers. An act of great valor could bring honor to generations yet to come. This is the world of heraldry. The coat of arms that a knight wore on his shield and banner was not a personal logo. It was the symbol of his lineage. He was, in a very real sense, fighting for the honor of that symbol. Historian George Duby wrote extensively about the importance of lineage in the medieval nobility. A noble's worth was inseparable from the fame and history of his ancestors. He was a temporary steward of a reputation that stretched back for generations. This created a powerful incentive for honorable behavior. If your personal actions could tarnish a reputation built over centuries, you would think very carefully before you acted dishonorably. This is the logic behind blood feuds, like the one between the Montagues and Capulets in Romeo and Juliet. An insult to one was an insult to all. But the flip side was also true. The family was a source of immense strength and support. It was a social safety net in a dangerous world. This sense of collective honor meant that you had a duty to uphold the family name, but the family also had a duty to protect you. We have largely lost this sense of collective intergenerational responsibility. The modern emphasis on individualism has its benefits. It allows for social mobility and personal freedom, but it can also be isolating. It places the entire burden of creating a life and a reputation on our own shoulders. What if we tried to reclaim a little of that medieval sense of collective identity? This doesn't mean we are responsible for the crimes of a distant ancestor, but it could mean thinking more about the legacy we are creating for our descendants. It could mean seeing our family not just as a collection of individuals, but as a long-term project. It's about asking not just what is good for me, but what will bring honor to my family name, even if family is one we choose for ourselves, like a close-knit group of friends or a company with a strong ethical culture. This idea of stewardship of a reputation can be a powerful motivator. A 2011 study in psychological science found that thinking about one's legacy, how one will be remembered by future generations can lead to more pro-social and ethical behavior. When we see ourselves as part of a chain that stretches into the past and the future, we are more likely to act with a sense of long-term responsibility. We can apply this to our communities as well. We can, act in a way that, brings honor to our neighborhood, our city, or our country. It's a way of showing respect for those who came before us and a sense of duty to those who will come after. It's about understanding that our individual lives are part of a much larger story. If our sense of self is deeply tied to the stories we tell about ourselves, what have we lost by replacing the long, deep story of family lineage with the short, ephemeral story of a personal social media feed? Could a renewed focus on genealogy and family history be a way to combat the modern sense of rootlessness and anxiety? And in a globalized, multicultural world, how can we create new forms of symbolic lineage based on shared values rather than blood that provide a similar sense of collective honor and responsibility? Number 8, when should you talk to your enemy? When we are in a deep conflict, our instinct is to cut off communication. We block them on social media. We refuse to take their calls. We demonize the other side. We see negotiation as a sign of weakness. The only acceptable outcome is total victory. We see this in our politics, in our business disputes, and sometimes even in our personal relationships. In the brutal world of medieval warfare, this was not always the case. Even in the midst of a bloody siege or a long campaign, there was a respected ritual for communication between enemies, the parley. A parley was a formal discussion between opposing commanders conducted under a flag of truce. It was a space where the rules of war were temporarily suspended. During a parley, you were expected to treat your enemy with a degree of formal respect, even if you planned on trying to kill him the next day. The chronicles of the Hundred Years' War, such as those by the French chronicler Jean Froissart, are filled with accounts of these meetings. Knights from opposing sides would meet between the lines, exchange formal greetings, and negotiate terms for surrender, the release of prisoners, or even temporary truces to bury the dead. The parley was not about being friends. It was a pragmatic recognition that even in total war there were shared interests. It was a way to manage conflict and prevent it from becoming pointlessly destructive. The ritual and formality of the parley were crucial. By creating a structured, safe space for communication, it allowed enemies to speak to each other without losing face. It was a way of respecting your opponent's strength and intelligence, even while you were fighting against them. To refuse a parley was often seen as a sign of dishonorable barbarism. It implied that you were an unreasonable brute, not a civilized warrior. We have forgotten the art of the parley. Our political discourse is a shouting match. Our legal battles are wars of attrition. We have lost the ability to create those sacred neutral spaces where we can speak to our adversaries with respect. What if we brought back the idea of the parley? In a business dispute, before spending millions on lawyers, the CEOs could agree to meet for a formal, off-the-record conversation with agreed-upon rules of civility. In a political negotiation, instead of posturing for the cameras, leaders could hold a private parley to find common ground. In our own lives, when we are in a conflict with someone, we could propose a parley, a specific time and place to talk, with the explicit agreement that for that 1 hour, there will be no yelling, no insults, no interruptions. The work of the Harvard Negotiation Project, famously captured in the book Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury, is a modern codification of the parley spirit. One of their key principles is to separate the people from the problem. The formality of the medieval parley did exactly this. It allowed you to respect the person, the opposing knight, while still fighting fiercely over the problem, the castle he was defending. This is a level of psychological sophistication we often lack. We fuse the person and the problem, and so any attack on their position feels like a personal attack. By reintroducing a little formal distance, a little ritual, we can create the space needed for rational problem solving. It's a way of showing respect for the possibility of a solution, even when we disrespect our opponent's position. Why have we become so convinced that communication with an adversary is a sign of weakness, when history shows it is often a sign of strategic strength? If the human brain is wired for tribalism and in group-out group thinking, what specific rituals and formal structures are most effective at overriding this instinct and allowing for productive dialogue with an enemy? And in an era of online conflict, what would a digital flag of truce look like? And how could we build platforms that encourage parley instead of pile-ons? Number 7, how can you show respect with a gift? We give gifts on birthdays and holidays. It's a nice tradition. We go to a store or a website. We buy something, we wrap it up. The gift is a symbol of our affection, but often the act of giving is a simple transaction. It doesn't create a deep, lasting bond. The gift is separate from the relationship. In the medieval world, gift giving was a far more serious and complex business. It was one of the central ways that society was held together. It was not a transaction, it was a ritual of social bonding. When a king gave a gift to a powerful lord, a fine horse, a jeweled sword, a grant of land, it was not just a present. It was a public statement. It said, I value you, I recognize your power, I expect your loyalty. The lord, by accepting the gift, was entering into a reciprocal obligation. He was now bound by honor to support the king. The French anthropologist Marcel Mauss, in his influential 1925 essay, The Gift, argued that in many traditional societies, there is no such thing as a free gift. Every gift carries with it the spirit of the giver and creates a social bond that must be repaid. The medieval world ran on this logic. The entire system of lordship and vassalage was a web of relationships maintained through the constant exchange of gifts and services. The Anglo-Saxon epic Beowulf is obsessed with gift-giving. The poem begins and ends with treasure. Hrothgar is a great king because he is a ring giver, a generous lord who rewards his warriors. Beowulf's loyalty is secured by the magnificent gifts he receives. The treasure is not just wealth, it is a physical manifestation of honor, loyalty, and reputation. To be a lord who did not give gifts was to be no lord at all. The gift was a way of showing respect for someone's worth. The quality of the gift had to match the status of the recipient. To give a small gift to a great warrior was an insult. The gift was a carefully calibrated signal of respect. We could bring this back by being more intentional about our own gift giving. Instead of just buying something, we could think about what the gift says. The most valuable gifts are often not the most expensive ones, but the ones that require the most thought and effort. A handmade gift, a book you loved that you think the other person would appreciate, the gift of your time and undivided attention, these are powerful signals of respect. They say, I have thought about you, I understand who you are, I have invested myself in this gift. This moves gift giving from the realm of commerce to the realm of relationship building. It also means being a more graceful receiver of gifts. In the medieval system, rejecting a gift was a grave insult. It was a rejection of the social bond being offered. Today, we are often quick to say, oh, you shouldn't have. By doing so, we can subtly diminish the act of giving. To receive a gift well with genuine gratitude is to show respect for the giver and to complete the social ritual. This applies to non-material gifts as well. When someone gives you a compliment, the most respectful response is a simple and sincere thank you, not a deflection. It acknowledges and honors their act of generosity. By treating the exchange of gifts, material or otherwise, with more seriousness and ritual, we can strengthen our social bonds and show respect in a more profound way. If gift-giving is a fundamental human social technology for creating bonds of obligation and trust, what happens to a society when its most common form of gifting becomes the exchange of meaningless likes on social media? What is the neurological difference between receiving a thoughtful physical gift and receiving a cash equivalent gift card? And could we design economic systems like mutual credit or local currencies that are based on the principles of a gift economy to foster stronger, more resilient communities? Number 6, who are you sworn to protect? We live in an age of individualism. Our primary duty is to ourselves, our happiness, our career, our personal growth. We may feel a sense of duty to our immediate family, but beyond that, the ties are often weak. The idea of having a sworn duty to protect someone outside our family, a code that requires us to be brave and selfless, can feel like something out of a fantasy novel. This was the world of chivalry. Chivalry as a formal code of conduct for the knightly class emerged in the High Middle Ages around the 12th century. It was a complex and often contradictory set of ideals, but at its core was the idea that a knight's great strength and skill in combat came with a set of solemn duties. A knight was sworn to protect his lord, of course, but the chivalric ideal demanded more. He was also supposed to be a protector of the weak and the defenseless, particularly women, orphans, and the church. He was expected to be brave in battle, but also merciful to a defeated enemy. He should be honest, loyal, and generous. The Song of Roland, an 11th century epic poem, provides an early portrait of this ideal warrior ethos. Roland's refusal to blow his horn for help until it is too late is a tragic example of knightly pride, but his devotion to his king and his men is the heart of the chivalric code. Of course, the reality rarely lived up to the ideal. Knights were often brutal, violent men, but the existence of the code itself is what's important. It provided a moral compass. It was a constant reminder that power comes with responsibility. It was a way of trying to civilize a violent warrior class. It was a form of respect for society itself, a belief that the strong have a duty to create a safe and just world for the less powerful. This idea of noblesse oblige, the obligation of the nobility, is a powerful one. It means that privilege is not just a right, it is a duty. We could use a modern form of chivalry. We don't have a knightly class, but we do have people with different kinds of power and privilege: economic, political, social. What if everyone with a position of power felt a sworn, chivalric duty to protect the less fortunate? What if a CEO felt a personal, honorable obligation, not just to her shareholders, but to the well-being of her lowest paid employees and the environment of the communities her company operates in? What if a politician saw themselves not as a warrior for their party, but as a sworn protector of all their constituents, especially the most vulnerable? This is a radical shift in mindset. It moves from a logic of self-interest to a logic of service. On a personal level, we can all adopt a small piece of the chivalric code. It can mean standing up for someone who is being bullied online or in person. It can mean using our skills and resources to help those in our community who are struggling. It can mean being a mentor to someone just starting out in our field. It is a conscious decision to use whatever strength we have in the service of others. It is the ultimate sign of respect for our shared humanity. It's the belief that we are all, in some small way, our brother's keeper. The philosopher Peter Singer has argued for a form of this in his work on effective altruism, using reason to determine how we can best use our resources to help others. This is a kind of data-driven chivalry, a modern application of an ancient ideal. If the ideal of chivalry acted as a crucial psychological restraint on the violence of a warrior class, what are the codes of conduct that could restrain the excesses of our modern powerful elites in finance, technology, and politics? This is the decline of a widely shared moral or religious framework, the reason why the idea of noblesse oblige has so little traction today. And in a complex, interconnected world, how do we define the weak and the defenseless that we have a duty to protect? Is it the person next door or someone on the other side of the planet? Number 5, why do we hide our gratitude? When someone does something for us, a favor, a kindness, a helping hand, we usually say thank you. And then most of the time, the moment passes and is forgotten. The debt of gratitude is considered paid by those 2 words. We are often uncomfortable with the idea of being indebted to someone. We want to be self-sufficient, to stand on our own 2 feet. We see indebtedness as a weakness. The medieval world saw things very differently. Publicly and formally acknowledging a debt of gratitude was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign of honor. It was a way of strengthening social ties. When a lesser noble received a favor from a greater one, perhaps a loan to equip his soldiers or support in a legal dispute, he was expected to publicly acknowledge his gratitude. He might do this at a feast, in front of his peers, by praising the generosity of his benefactor. This was not seen as groveling. It was a performance of loyalty. It showed that he was a man who understood his obligations and was not too proud to admit that he needed help. This public acknowledgement reinforced the relationship. The benefactor's reputation for generosity was enhanced, and the recipient's reputation for loyalty was confirmed. It was a win-win that strengthened the social fabric. This also applied to non-material debts. A student would have a lifelong duty of respect and gratitude to the master who taught him his trade. This relationship was often formalized. The student was expected to uphold the master's reputation and methods. This created chains of intellectual and artistic lineage that could last for centuries. This culture of acknowledged indebtedness was a way of honoring the fact that no one achieves anything alone. It was a formal recognition of our interdependence. We could bring this back by being more public and formal in our expressions of gratitude. Instead of just a quick thanks in an email, we could take the time to write a proper letter to someone who has helped us in our career. In a company meeting, a manager could take a moment to publicly praise an employee who went above and beyond, formally acknowledging the company's debt to them. On a personal level, we could make it a regular practice to tell the important people in our lives not just that we love them, but exactly why we are grateful for them. A 2015 study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology showed that writing and delivering a letter of gratitude increased happiness for both the writer and the recipient. It is a powerful positive intervention. This is not about creating a culture of uncomfortable obligation. It is about creating a culture where it is safe and honorable to admit that we rely on each other. The modern obsession with self-reliance is a myth. Everyone who is successful has been helped by others, by parents, teachers, mentors, friends. By hiding this, we are being dishonest. By acknowledging it, we show respect for those who helped us, and we give permission to others to ask for help themselves. It fosters a culture of mentorship and mutual support. It is the simple, honest, and honorable admission that we are all connected, and that we all owe debts of gratitude that can never be fully repaid. And that is a beautiful thing, not a shameful one. What is the social cost of a culture that encourages the myth of the self-made individual and discourages the public acknowledgement of our dependence on others? If our brains release bonding hormones like oxytocin when we express and receive gratitude, is our reluctance to do so formally contributing to a sense of social isolation? And how could we design our institutions, our schools, our workplaces, our governments to systematically and publicly honor the debts of gratitude that hold them together? Number 4, have we forgotten how to be a good host? When we have guests over for dinner, our main goal is usually to impress them. We worry about whether the food is good enough, whether the house is clean enough, whether the conversation is witty enough. The focus is often on our own performance as a host. We want our guests to leave thinking, wow, they are great cooks and have a beautiful home. In the medieval mindset, the host's duty was simpler and more profound, the comfort and honor of the guest. The focus was not on the host, but entirely on the visitor. A good host in the medieval period was expected to provide the best of everything they had for their guest. The guest would be given the best room, the best food, the best wine. The host and his family would make do with less. This was a powerful demonstration of respect. It was a non-verbal way of saying, your presence in my home is an honor, and I will place your needs above my own. The 14th century English poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight contains long, loving descriptions of the lavish hospitality shown to Sir Gawain at the castle of Lord Bertilac. He is bathed, dressed in fine robes, and feasted. The detailed focus on these acts of hosting shows how central they were to the aristocratic code of conduct. This principle was not just for the rich. Even a peasant was expected to share what little he had with a traveler. To fail in this duty was a source of great shame. The act of breaking bread with someone was a sacred pact. Once you had shared a meal under someone's roof, a bond of trust was formed. This is an ancient idea, predating the Middle Ages, but it was a central part of their social world. It meant that a host's primary job was to make their guests feel safe, honored, and respected. We can revive this spirit by shifting the focus of our own hosting. Instead of trying to put on a performance, we can concentrate on making our guests feel genuinely welcome and comfortable. This might mean asking about their dietary restrictions in advance. It might mean playing music that they like, not just what we like. It might mean focusing the conversation on their interests. It's about being an attentive and empathetic listener. It's about creating an atmosphere where the guest can truly relax and be themselves. This kind of hosting is a gift. It is an act of service, and it shows a much deeper respect than a fancy but soulless dinner party. This also applies to how we act as guests. A good guest in the medieval world understood the honor being bestowed upon them and was expected to be gracious, entertaining, and not to overstay their welcome. There's a reciprocity to it. Today we can be better guests by being on time, by bringing a small gift of appreciation for the host, by actively participating in conversation, and by offering to help clean up. It's about recognizing that hosting is an effort and showing respect for that effort. By taking the rituals of hosting and guesting more seriously, we can turn a simple meal into a powerful act of community and mutual respect. It transforms a social obligation into a meaningful human connection. Why does modern hosting so often become a source of anxiety and performance stress for the host, rather than a joyful act of service? If sharing a meal is a deeply ingrained biological and cultural mechanism for building trust, what are we losing as a society as more people eat alone or on the go? And could a revival of simple, home-based hospitality be a powerful antidote to the political and social polarization that divides our communities? Number 3, could removing your hat indoors change your attitude? We have very few rules of etiquette left that are universally understood and practiced. One of the few that survives, though it is fading, is the idea that men should remove their hats when they go indoors, especially in a home or a place of worship. We mostly do it out of habit, without thinking about it. We might say it's just polite. But where does this custom come from, and what does it really mean? The practice has its roots in the medieval code of the knight. A knight's helmet was his primary piece of protection in battle. To remove it was to make himself vulnerable. When a knight entered a friendly castle or a church, he would remove his helmet. This was a clear and powerful signal. It said, I am in a safe place. I trust the people here. I mean no harm. It was a gesture of peace and respect. By exposing his head, he was placing himself at the mercy of his host. It was a physical act of lowering one's defenses. Conversely, to keep one's helmet on in the presence of a friendly lord would be a shocking insult. It would imply a lack of trust and a readiness for violence. Over the centuries, as helmets were replaced by hats, the gesture remained, but its original, potent meaning has been largely forgotten. This principle of symbolic disarmament is a powerful way to show respect. It's about consciously making ourselves a little more open, a little more vulnerable, to create an atmosphere of trust. We can apply this principle in many modern contexts. For example, when you go into a meeting, you can take your phone out of your pocket and place it face down on the table. This is the modern equivalent of removing your helmet. It is a signal that says, for the next hour, you have my full attention. I am not going to be distracted by the outside world. I am here with you, and I am open to what you have to say. It is a small gesture, but it can completely change the dynamic of a meeting. It shows respect for everyone else's time and intelligence. We can do this in our personal interactions as well. When we're having a serious conversation with someone, we can turn off the television. We can put away our laptop, we can physically turn our body to face them and make eye contact. These are all forms of symbolic disarmament. We are removing the armor of distraction that we use to protect ourselves from genuine human connection. The psychologist Sherry Turkle, in her book Reclaiming Conversation, argues that the mere presence of a phone on a table between two people changes the content and quality of their conversation. We talk about less serious things. We are less willing to be vulnerable. By consciously removing these distractions, we are showing respect for the conversation and for the person we are with. The act of removing a hat is a relic of a time when people understood that respect had to be physically demonstrated. It wasn't enough to feel it, you had to show it. We can revive the spirit of this practice by becoming more aware of the armor we wear in our daily lives, our phones, our laptops, our sunglasses, our headphones, and by making a conscious choice to remove it when we want to show someone that we trust them and that they have our full undivided attention. If the simple act of removing a helmet was a universally understood sign of trust, what are the new universally understood digital gestures of trust and respect we need to invent for our online interactions? What is the neurological impact of the continuous partial attention that our digital devices encourage? And how does it affect our ability to form deep, trusting relationships? And could a workplace or a family that institutes device-free zones or helmet-off meetings see a measurable improvement in creativity, collaboration, and emotional well-being? Number 2, who do you champion? In our modern creative and professional world, we are told to be self-promoters. We build our personal brand. We network, we hustle. The goal is to get our own name and our own work noticed. We see other people in our field primarily as competition. The idea of dedicating a significant amount of our time and resources to promoting someone else's work can feel counterintuitive, even foolish. This is the opposite of the medieval system of patronage. For centuries, art, music, architecture, and literature were funded by patrons, kings, popes, dukes, and wealthy merchants. An artist like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo did not create their masterpieces and then hope to sell them on the open market. They worked under the patronage of a powerful and wealthy individual, like Lorenzo de' Medici in Florence or Pope Julius II in Rome. The patron provided the artist with financial support, housing, and social standing. In return, the artist created works that brought glory and prestige to the patron. This was a symbiotic relationship. The patron was not just a customer, they were a champion. The quality of the art they commissioned was a direct reflection of their own taste, intelligence, and power. To be a great patron was a sign of great respect for culture and for the creative spirit. This relationship was based on personal trust and mutual respect. The patron had to trust the artist's vision, and the artist had to respect the patron's goals. It was a collaboration. This system produced some of the greatest works of art in human history. The patron was not a passive consumer of culture. They were an active participant in its creation. They saw it as their duty and their privilege to identify and support talent. This was a way of investing in the cultural legacy of their city and their family. We can bring back the spirit of patronage in a more democratic way. We don't need to be Medici to be a patron. It's about becoming a champion for the work and talent of others. In your own field, instead of just promoting your own work on social media, you can make a consistent effort to highlight the work of a junior colleague or a promising newcomer whose work you admire. You can write a testimonial for a small business you love. You can buy the book of a debut author instead of just waiting for it to be in the library. You can become a member or a subscriber to a publication or a podcast you value. These are all acts of modern patronage. They are a way of saying, I believe in this work, and I am willing to invest my own resources, my money, my time, my reputation to help it succeed. This is a powerful way to build community and to fight against the isolating effects of our hyper-competitive culture. It shows respect for the talent and hard work of others. It also has benefits for the patron. By becoming known as someone who identifies and supports talent, you build a reputation for good judgment and generosity. You become a hub in a network of creative people. You are no longer just a competitor, you are a respected leader in your community. The writer and artist Austin Kleon talks about the importance of being a scenius, a person who helps create a scene of creative collaboration rather than a lone genius. Patronage is the engine of scenius. It's a conscious choice to build a bigger, better world for everyone, not just for ourselves. In a world where algorithms on platforms like Spotify and YouTube dictate so much of our cultural consumption, what is the role of the human patron and curator in discovering and championing new talent? If the old patronage system created a few great masterpieces for the elite, can a new democratized system of micro-patronage like Patreon or Kickstarter create a more diverse and vibrant cultural ecosystem for everyone? And what is our personal responsibility to financially support the art and culture that we consume for free online, and what happens to that culture if we fail to do so? Number one, are you willing to break bread? And if there is one single universal symbol of peace, trust, and community, it is the act of sharing a meal. It is a gesture that transcends culture and history. But in our fast-paced, individualized world, it is a ritual that is rapidly losing its power. We eat alone at our desks, we grab fast food in our cars, we scroll through our phones during family dinners. We have reduced eating to a biological necessity, a refueling stop. We have forgotten that it is also a social and spiritual necessity. In the medieval world, to break bread with someone was the ultimate sign of respect and trust. It was a formal, almost sacred act. When a lord invited his vassals to a feast in his great hall, it was more than just a meal. It was a ritual that reaffirmed the bonds of loyalty and community. The shared food and drink were a physical symbol of their shared identity and purpose. To eat at a man's table was to accept his protection and to tacitly promise him your loyalty. This is why betrayal at the dinner table of Jesus, a violation of the guest right, was considered one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. Dante, in his Inferno, places traitors to their guests in the very lowest circle of hell, frozen in ice for eternity. He considered it a sin even worse than betraying your own family. The symbolism of this act is deeply ingrained in our culture. The Last Supper in the Christian tradition is a sacred meal that forms the basis of the Eucharist, the central ritual of the faith. The act of sharing bread and wine is a symbol of communion with God and with a community of believers. This deep-seated power comes from the fundamental vulnerability of eating. When we eat, we are open, we are at ease, we cannot be on our guard. To share this moment of vulnerability with someone is a profound act of trust. It is difficult to hate someone you have just shared a meal with. The act itself forces a degree of intimacy and humanity. We can bring this back by being fiercely intentional about protecting the ritual of the shared meal. It means creating a rule that there are no phones at the dinner table. It means turning off the television. It means taking the time to set a proper table, even for a simple weekday meal. It means asking questions and actually listening to the answers. It is about creating a small, sacred space in our busy lives that is dedicated solely to connection and community. This is perhaps the simplest, yet most powerful medieval way to show respect. It is a way of respecting our families, our friends, and ourselves. It is a way of saying that our relationships are more important than our deadlines, our emails, or our social media feeds. This principle extends beyond our homes. The most effective way to solve a conflict, to build a team, or to welcome a new neighbor is often to share a meal. Business lunches, community potlucks, and welcome dinners for new employees are not frivolous extras. They are some of the most important work we can do. They are the moments where we stop being just a collection of individuals with separate goals and start becoming a community. It is the practice that underpins all the others. It is where we build the trust that makes a bow meaningful, where we forge the relationships that make hospitality a joy, and where we create the bonds that make our word our bond. It is the foundation of a respectful society. If the shared meal is a cornerstone of social bonding, what is the cumulative psychological and social damage of a convenience food culture that encourages solo, rushed eating? Could we address many of our social problems, like from loneliness in the elderly to political polarization, by massively investing in public and private initiatives that encourage communal dining? And in a future that might be more virtual and remote, what will be the digital equivalent of breaking bread? And will it ever be able to replicate the profound, trust-building power of sharing a physical meal with another human being?